We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASF. Route 291 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Police say this was the most horrifying crime they've seen in this normally quiet part of Canada. Just before midnight Saturday, a gunman was reported in Portapique, a remote seaside village where the suspect, 51-year-old, owned property. For the next 12 hours, along nearly 100 kilometers of highway, police fielded dozens of emergency calls about house fires, gunshots, and other incidents. Heavily armed officers pursued the suspect, who at one point was dressed as a policeman and driving an apparently homemade police car. Just before noon Sunday, eyewitnesses said they saw the suspect lying on the ground, surrounded by police at a petrol station near Nova Scotia's International Airport. Visibly shocked senior officers said one of their own, a 23-year veteran of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, was among the victims.
The global pandemic, which officially began in mid-March of 2020, took its toll on people all over the world. A physical, mental, and emotional toll that will live on with most for years, if not longer. Perhaps the one thing more unimaginable than surviving through so much turmoil would be to withstand the loss of your loved one to unspeakable violence. Or even just sitting inside of their own homes, reflecting on the terrifying illness that was sweeping the world. As the daily media was filled with new terms like social distancing, masking up, and constant press conferences with updates on local and global infection numbers, news stories of mass shootings were becoming fewer and farther in between. The mass shooting violence hasn't stopped, or even decreased. The stories have merely taken a back seat to the more significant international news streams. April 18th and 19th, 2020 was still relatively early in the pandemic, yet most of Canada was still thawing from the blustery northern winters, and folks were eager to get outdoors, stretch their legs, and breathe in the fresh air. Properly masked up, of course. Saturday, April 18th began as a typical chilly morning in Portapique, a rural community in Nova Scotia, Canada. Sadly, what started as a regular day in a very irregular world would culminate into Canadian history's worst mass shooting event. 22 innocent people were murdered, and another 3 people were injured in an attack that spanned 13 hours and included 16 crime scenes. Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the no notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. We will refer to today's shooter as John. Because she is a significant part of the story, we will also give the shooter's wife a pseudonym and will refer to her as Mary. John and Mary were celebrating, as much as one could celebrate in the COVID world, their anniversary on Saturday, April 18th. The day seemed to be going swimmingly for the couple, who were spending time at the portion of their expansive property they call the warehouse, located at 136 Orchard Beach Drive, Portapique, Nova Scotia, Canada. Because everyone was in quarantine, the couple was FaceTiming with friends and taking selfies together. There didn't appear to be any imminent danger. But looks can be deceiving, and underneath what may have appeared to be a cheerful, untroubled facade, conflict was simmering, ready to boil over into an explosion of highly terrifying, yet highly calculated violence. Not just for Mary, but all of the residents of this little community. In addition to the structure John and Mary called the warehouse, they owned a beautiful log home called the cottage. While they called it a cottage, the house was their permanent residence, and by no means small. They were done with their anniversary festivities for the evening, so they started walking back to the cottage along a path they constructed from the warehouse to the large home. With his plans in mind, John retrieved a gas can and immediately started pouring gasoline all over the cottage's interior, as well as along the path to the warehouse. He then proceeded to light the house on fire.
So there's a structure fire. There's a person down there with a gun. They're still looking for him. It's very vague what's going on down there.
Before she could even react, John grabbed and smashed Mary's cell phone so she couldn't call 911. Left with no way to call for help, Mary was in an awful situation. There were reports that she was attacked, handcuffed, and locked in the back seat of the replica patrol vehicle her husband later used on his killing spree. However, our research on this case included a 40-page search warrant affidavit that was so heavily redacted, we cannot confirm or deny this to be an absolute fact. Other reports indicate that Mary managed to flee from the house and hid in the nearby woods until the break of day. Undeterred, John collected his arsenal of weapons, including a Ruger 14 mini rifle, a 9mm Ruger P89 pistol, a .223 caliber Colt law enforcement carbine rifle, and a 9mm Smith & Wesson pistol, which had been stolen from a constable. For reference, law enforcement is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, otherwise known as RCMP in Canada. The American equivalent of police officers are constables. John then loaded up his replica RCMP cruiser with his firearms. It was time to attack, when the residents were at their most vulnerable, when they were caught completely unaware. After he lit the house on fire, John's neighbor from across the street came running out to see what was going on. Seeing this, John shot and killed his neighbor Greg, and his wife Jamie. Horrifically, John shot their family dog Zoe too, though she miraculously survived. Greg and Jamie Blair's two young sons, ages 10 and 12 years old, found a way to escape as John was setting their house to blazes. The boys ran to their other neighbor's house that belonged to Lisa McCulley.
They could smell the smoke, but it was gun smoke at that point. And then my little brother ran out and seen that he pulled some logs out of the fire, scattered them around on the floor, and then turned the propane range on.
Corey Ellison and his brother Clint Ellison were strolling down the beach when they saw flames and immediately ran to investigate. Sadly, the men didn't make it far when suddenly Corey was shot right there in the sand, instantly dead.
I could see a body laying on the side of the road. As I got closer, I could see it was my brother. I got one more step closer, I could see blood, and he wasn't moving. I shut my flashlight off, I turned around, and I ran for my life in the dark. Around and looked down towards the road I had just run from to see a little flashlight flashing around looking for me. I ran so hard into the woods. I was lucky enough that when I was hiding, I waited about an hour before I could pull my cell phone out because I didn't want it to light up. and light and give my position away. And when I thought it was safe, I phoned my dad and told him, phone the police. I think Corey's shot and dead. And I said, shut the lights off and hide. And he said, yes, I will. I said, don't call me back. I don't want my phone to light up. And I laid on the ground, and I nearly froze to death. I was laying there for hours. All I could hear was explosions from the fires and gunshots coming from all around me. Yeah. It was the most terrifyingest thing I've ever experienced in my life. They got me out of there with an armored vehicle. A nightmare through hell. It's a nightmare through hell to walk up and find my brother dead and to be hunted by this fella that killed all these people. I'll be traumatized for the rest of my life.
Just after 10 p.m., the first of many 911 calls began ringing through to the Portapique area dispatchers. The very first person that John shot was hit in the shoulder and injured. This victim's name was not released. The victim could relay to the police that the shooter was driving what appeared to be a police cruiser. What's more, he gave the police a possible name of the suspect.
Police received its first 911 call with a report of a shooting at a home in the area. Officers arrived on scene at 10:26 in the evening, where they located a male who was leaving the area with an apparent gunshot wound. They learned that this male was shot while driving his vehicle, and the victim indicated that a vehicle had driven by him while he was driving, and that he was shot as the vehicle was passing by.
Lisa McCulley, the neighbor the two young boys ran to, lived directly across the street from John and Mary's warehouse. The warehouse was also becoming a blazing inferno after John lit that building on fire too. Lisa saw a constable's cruiser parked outside the warehouse, and thinking it was an actual law enforcement officer with the RCMP, she started walking towards him. Wholly unaware, she was heading straight to her execution. John raised his gun, shot, and killed Lisa. The Blair boys made it to the McCulley home and were ushered inside where Lisa's son and daughter were hiding. Each of the children went down into the basement of the McCulley home and called 911. Dispatch stayed on the phone with them for over 2 hours until they were rescued.
And they seen a lot that night, but I'm amazed at how strong they're being. They hid in the house until he was gone, and then they took off to the neighbor's house and hid inside with their 2 little kids next door until the cops came.
John continued his malicious rampage by setting various homes on fire, which killed the occupants inside, burning them, whether alive or in their sleep. We pray those victims slept through it, never waking only to witness a living nightmare.
We're seeing huge flames and smoke from where we are.
The RCMP blocked the main road in and out of the community of Portapique, which wasn't a difficult maneuver as there was only one road in and out of the village. Police hoped to essentially corner the shooter into the neighborhood where they could track him easier. Unfortunately, there was an unmarked back road along a blueberry field that was left unblocked. That was precisely where John was able to drive out of the community, undetected, at approximately 10:35 p.m. Of course, noticing this madman would have been difficult for just about any innocent observer or bystander. John was driving a nearly identical replica of an RCMP cruiser, and he was wearing what appeared to be an authentic RCMP uniform. At 11:12 p.m., John was seen in Deborah, driving near an industrial area. While we can't say for certain, it is presumed that John slept there, unnoticed, in the fake police car for the night.
Do we know if these, cut this ceiling? No, not for sure. It's in quite a ways, the actual house. They're bringing the victims out to that intersection from the actual scene. But no, they don't know if they've caught him. I don't know.
Around 5:43 a.m., John left Deborah before the sun rose, and at about 6:29 a.m.,